Hi, everyone. My name is Cyndy Mcdonald. I'm an educator and an entrepreneur. I'm also an instructor for the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program. And one of the honors and privileges that I have is being able to interview experts in this area and bring to you their voices and their perspectives firsthand. And so I'm very honored to have with me today my friend and colleague, Laura Young. She is the Director of Enrollment Management at the UCLA School of Arts and Architecture. So welcome, Laura. I'm glad to have you here today.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background. What led you to admissions at the UCLA School of Arts and Architecture?
I was one of those who went to the school and got into admissions by accident and then stayed. So I grew up in the Los Angeles area and then ended up going to UCLA. I came through the visual arts major, and then when and I had no idea what I was going to do. I was making things and kind of how making art was the way that I understood the world. It was how I connected to a lot of different topics. So that's why it ended up being the right major. And I my how I kind of got into what started the ball rolling in terms of admission was my academic advisor in my sophomore year flagged me down in the hall one day, and she said, "Oh, like we've got an event with admitted students and we need current students to go and talk to them. You're not afraid of anybody, so show up at this place this time and there's free lunch." And I was like, "Okay, like that's free food?" Like, so if you ever want college students to come to anything, if there is food, then they are more likely to come. And that was certainly true for me. And even now, I still think a little bit with my stomach. So I came and I met my former boss, and I thought, and they just kept asking me back for things, for those kinds of activities. And I thought, well, and I talked to them and I thought, well, this is fun. Like this is a job. You can do this full time. You can talk to people about going to college and then get paid for it. And you also travel. That sounds fun. That's a fun job. I'm going to remember this. And then after I graduated, I ended up working at the Hammer Museum, which is one of the university museums, for about a year and a half in education and public programming. That was also a student job that turned into a full-time job. And then after that, my predecessor sent out an email saying that she was leaving the position. And I called her and I said, "Who gets your job? Because I want your job." And she said, "Nobody has my job." And so I ended up applying for it and I got it. And now I have been at UCLA on campus, like student plus employment for um, around 25 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah. So 20 years working.
But that demonstrates how your perspective, as you said, that's how you see the world from that lens of an art perspective. And then you bring this into a job that you didn't even know existed, and that you could use all that knowledge and expertise and that vision, that perspective that you have.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like a lot of the skills that I bring to bear in the work that I do. So I started out more in sort of an admissions and recruitment position, and then moved into enrollment management when I became the director of my office. And pretty much everything I've just learned by doing. I've learned by mentorship and by asking questions. And something about being at UCLA is that we have to synthesize and kind of come up with our own systems and processes that work because we're in such a large bureaucratic system. There are a lot of different agendas at play. I represent 4 different departments, and so those are 4 different departments with 5 distinct faculty groups.
Mhm.
And so in arts and architecture, I formally interact with architecture and urban design, art, which is our fine arts program, design media arts, dance, and world arts and cultures. So it's a lot of really different, a variety of expertise, a variety of personalities. And we also interact very meaningfully with undergraduate admission. So I'm sort of the intermediary between what my school wants and kind of how they get how they want to identify their students. And then also what the larger university needs and how do we make that all work together? So it is, I am making it all up as I go along in a lot of ways, but it's really fun and I enjoy that synthesis process. And that's very much rooted in my artistic training is what's available, what's here, what needs to happen. There's a lot of different things that have to happen in order for this entire project to move forward. I need to make do with what I have and how do I make it work for the most amount of people?
And those are all skills that you can use in any kind of occupation or profession.
Yes, you can.
It's all problem solving. So, as an advisor, when I have a student come into my office and they say, I want to study, or, either as a major or a minor, performing arts, so, dance or something like that, what questions should I ask the student about that?
So I kind of have a question back to you in that sense is, do you get a lot of students coming to you straight and saying, I want to major in the arts?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. I mean, I feel like when I talk to people who are like on the ground speaking to high school students, that sometimes you really have to wiggle the arts experience out of them, that maybe they don't mention it, maybe they don't think that it's a big deal. And then suddenly, in conversation, they drop somewhere like this is the fourth meeting that you've had with them. And then they very casually say like, well, like I know four different musical instruments and I practice about 3 hours a week. And
Mhm.
like, you don't know, like, oh, that is a significant amount of time that you spend doing a thing. Or that they're involved in theater or dance, and they just sort of see it as this, well, like, I don't know, like this doesn't really mean anything in terms of college. It's just sort of like what I do. Like they're my friends. Sometimes it doesn't really occur in school. And so I think that a lot of students get this idea is that it's not serious. And
Mhm.
I think that if somebody is saying, I really want to major, like I want to major in an arts area, um, is, it's certainly a minority. I hear a lot of like minoring, like I'd like to major in computer science and I want to minor in music or something like that. And I think that there's space for all of those conversations. So kind of as an advisor, it's like how all of these kind of different questions that you ask about how to figure out like what role does this activity play in this person's life? And then how do they understand it? Because if anything, I think that helping students understand the significance of what they're doing, and it's like, yeah, see, there's the motion sensor that I was talking about. But helping them understand that this is kind of part of their integrated life and this is significant and it's something that they are choosing to do usually outside of school, and that this has to do with their friendships, their community, maybe something having to do with like family values, and kind of helping them understand how to integrate that story into their next move, which is going to college. Because if anything, I see students de-emphasizing that they think of it as this separate, very often kind of flaky thing that they're doing, that is, oh, it's just for funsies, I'm just relaxing, when actually it is a very kind of a weight bearing activity that says a lot about who they are as a person.
That's true. That is very true. And I have seen that probably more as an advisor of students coming in and saying, I want to study this, STEM field, and yet they have this whole artistic performing arts background, and you look at it and go, how do these two go together? And I think that that becomes one of the roles that we have, hearing you talk about that, and then as an advisor, helping them to see, well, you can have both. You don't have to give up one for the other. I have a student right now, he's a senior doing nursing, but he taught himself 10 different instruments, and he's got a marching band scholarship and a jazz band scholarship at his university. So it's created a double work, but he has received more fulfillment from that because he didn't have to give up one to the other. So
Yeah.
how about parents? Sometimes their students are doing this because their parents feel like, oh, you can't go be, major in music or theater or creative writing because there's no job there. So what's the message for the parents in that regard?
I think that, I mean, particularly for the grown-ups in students' lives, um, it's it's a really difficult thing to, because a lot of people look immediately at return on investment.
Hmm.
And the issue with the return on investment discussion is that return on investment data is largely informed by employers in a variety of sectors reporting earnings for their employees in a 40-hour work week, like in a single employment sector, where visual and performing artists historically do not work like that at all. They have, there is a, when people say like, oh, you're not going to be able to get you're not going to be able to get full-time work, like one full-time paying job in the arts in order to be able to live. First of all, that's not true. There's plenty of like full-time, regular looking employment in the arts that's available. And also there is the way that artists work, which is typically not like a 9 to 5.
Right.
So if you flip the conversation and if you take this kind of complaint or this criticism about being a working artist, like you're going to have to work multiple jobs. There's another way to say that, which is you're capable of multiple income streams,
Hmm.
which not everybody is capable of doing. And if you can, I'm not in control of these things. I'm just moving around. And if you think about it in that way, that you have an extremely versatile worker who is capable enough in a lot of different things to be able to have multiple income streams. So that's a good thing. And, but those stories aren't being told by ROI information because you might have somebody who is, I don't know, maybe they're a traveling nurse over here and maybe they are doing a little bit of graphic design on the side and maybe like, I don't know, like a wedding clarinetist over here. And all of that is a little bit irregular. It's not one single job, but when you put it all together, all of those income streams mean like enough in your pocket at the end of the day, and you also get to do what you want. And if you need that kind of flexibility in order to be happy and kind of have your life go the way that it is, that's the way that a lot of creative people work. And the way that data is collected on employment doesn't advantage people who work that way.
That's true. That is very true. And I think going back to that point of, we're looking at the future, the projections show and the data shows that we're looking at a much more gig-based economy where you're not going to have that 9 to 5 get the watch at the end of the day, or at the end of your employment. You're going to have all these different jobs and everything in our world, whether it's in the US or other countries, is everything is communication based. I mean, and so much that we do is visually based. And so having that opportunity to share a story and convey a message in ways that are more encompassing, it seems to me that having that artistic background or perspective is actually going to be a very valuable thing to have.
I just read an article the other day from with an interview with Scott Galloway, who is a famous entrepreneur. I can't remember, but he was speaking, like he works at the intersection of like business and tech. And he was speaking about what kind of skills are going to be valuable kind of in a future marketplace because of the way that artificial intelligence is adapting and taking over certain kinds of jobs. So in the past couple of years, there's been this massive push towards like learn coding, learn coding, learn coding, learn coding. But now, artificial intelligence and like ChatGPT, like that is starting to sort of fill in spots where you don't need that expertise anymore. And he said, what you need is storytelling skills. So how do you put together and how do you assemble a narrative depending on whatever it is that you do? So kind of, I don't know, to use myself as an example, like here I am, like I'm an enrollment manager, which I never thought, like you couldn't tell me anything about what this was when I was 17 at all. Like, what is that? And I was never, ever, ever good at math, ever. And now I prepare data analytics for a fairly well-known school and they trust me with it. But I know it, like I've learned enough about Excel and about statistics and about data stories to be able to put information together in a way that tells the story that I need it to, because I know how to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what stories work. I know what kind of structure works for most people so that they can also understand the numbers that I'm giving them on a page saying, here's how you kind of follow this thought process through, because you're asking me questions about like, oh, how many students graduate in this amount of time or who switches around their majors. And I'm able to put that together in a visual format that makes sense to most people. And that's arts. That's like, I learned that in the visual arts. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you give it almost like a personality. It becomes something that doesn't just go on a shelf. It gives an opportunity to have that interaction, and that's what I love about modern technology and communication is having that interaction. But for a student, then, as they're putting together like an application for college, what do they need to focus on if they're wanting to communicate that they have that perspective, they have that artistic or musical love? How do they translate that into something on an application?
I think that, I mean, you certainly work with students where you're thinking about, okay, there's an entire application, there's places where there's more written information and there's like places with less written information. So you have a place like the application essay where you have a little bit more room to kind of flex, kind of wiggle around a little bit, have a little bit more space, tell a little bit more of a story. But those storytelling principles also apply to, those tiny little spaces where you're trying to fill in and you've got like 100 words to describe a certain activity that you do, or like extracurriculars or like community engagement. So that's also kind of that's a utilitarian space as well. So all of that kind of becomes a balance because there's a way to tell. And I think that students who, like, if you really like think about somebody who's interested in, say, acting, and they might say, well, I watch a lot of movies. Like, is that going to be a compelling one-liner? Like, if you spend a lot of time watching movies, or are you doing directed research, like in the performing arts with the purpose of like gaining more knowledge towards your craft,
Mm-hmm.
because it isn't just,
Right.
you can watch movies for enjoyment. Everybody's going to watch, and this is what's cool about movies, is everybody's going to watch a movie in a slightly different way. Some people are, they're looking at the cinematography, they're looking at where the light is coming from. And, you might be a person who's really interested in like facial expressions and like all the little things that happen in people's faces to be able to convey emotion. And you might be a student of that as an actor. Like, what are they doing with their bodies? What are they doing with their hands, their faces? So being able to explain that you're approaching this particular activity with intentionality, I think is really good for somebody to know that that's what you're doing. Like, you're not, this isn't just sort of a recreational activity, that this is you're doing this on purpose.
Yeah. And that is a very good point. And that is something that I think one of the benefits or values that we have as advisors working with students, because they often don't see that. And when they say, "Oh, I just watch movies or I just play games," well, let's dig into it a little bit more
Yeah,
and
kind
say,
of like
what is it?
teasing out the process
Hmm.
because so
Hmm.
much about the arts, there's so much focus on the finished product, like the movie or the play or like the
Hmm.
concert, the publication, what have you, or the thing that goes up in a museum or a gallery. But the real sort of the meat of what is happening for the individual is the process. And that's a journey, and that's editing, that's leaving things behind, that's adding things. It's this whole push-pull of consideration, which is very much like going through a college application process because you have to decide what to put in and what to leave out and how does that, what's meaningful about that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's part of it too, is sometimes you have to leave some things out. You can't cover everything. Even though it may be true, you don't have to tell them every little thing. But some colleges, universities, I know there's an additional application beyond the regular university, like for the School of Art and Architecture and other colleges too. So, what kind of things are put on those additional applications that the students or advisors might be aware of?
So what you're talking about is a supplemental application. So in terms of a supplement, and there are some schools that will require a supplement, and then there are some schools that have an optional supplement. So I know that the Common App, I've never worked for a Common App school, but I'm terrible at minding my own business. So I've seen this chart of like what, Common App schools and whether or not they have an arts supplement.
Hmm.
And
There's a
I
grid with that.
yeah, but they don't say whether it is required or whether it's optional. And I really wish they would put that there because that actually changes the way that's very significant in the way that information is um, considered in the admission process. Because if there's an artistic supplement, if there's an audition, a portfolio, typically like extra writing, sort of arts focused writing, like an artist statement, other creative materials as needed, if it's required, then that usually carries a great deal of weight in the admission process. There's usually more people involved. There's, arts faculty who are kind of weighing in and making recommendations. There might be like live auditions, portfolio reviews, what have you. Um, and that kind of happens congruently or, in a certain kind of sequence with the academic review or kind of the general campus review. If it's optional, to me, like right now, that's sort of very much a Wild West situation. Um, and that's a place where it would be, if it's an optional supplement, then just asking a lot of questions if something doesn't make sense. Like, who is going to be looking at it? Is it going to be an admission counselor? Are you passing this off to the faculty? Because sometimes that material isn't looked at by faculty. It might be somebody in the admission office who has expertise in the arts. So that also can change things. Sometimes, can you submit in multiple areas? So if somebody has music talent and then also visual arts talent, there are some schools that will only allow you to submit in one place, and then you've got to decide like which one's better or which one works more with my application. So in terms of that, like who looks at the application, and then with optional supplements in particular, are there scholarships attached to any of this? Because sometimes there are, especially for the performing arts. Because if they need instrumentalists for orchestras or marching band, then sometimes there are scholarships that can happen out of that might help you make your decision.
Yeah, that's very true. And oftentimes I'll have students who want to say participate in the band or jazz band or theater, and their first question is, "Do I have to be a major in order
Mhm.
to do this?" But I think if they take that next step and say, "Yes, I want to study this, and so I want to do the audition or do the portfolio," Now I know, especially you brought up auditions. Auditions are being done similar as they were before, but a little bit different. So let's talk about how auditions, what they're at right now, and what that looks like, and what it might
Yeah,
look like in the
because the
future.
last time we spoke, it was before 2020.
Yeah, it was before
So,
COVID.
right. So live auditions are still like live audition, just performing arts auditions have certainly changed in terms of accessibility. So I think everyone, for better or for worse, just got real comfortable with Zoom.
Mhm.
So there's more option. A lot of schools have offered more options there. So you can have remote auditions. So Zoom or some kind of like viewer platform. So you don't have to show up in person, which, is a considerable time and expense investment. So in that sense, it's good that there are more remote options. I know some schools will still offer video. I mean, there's always this space of, I know there still kind of exists within the performing arts. Like if you show up in person, then somehow you're like more seriouser than somebody who can't show up in person. So that can be a place to ask, especially if you are somebody who, for whatever reason, cannot come to a live audition. It's always good to ask, like, I can't come. There are so many good reasons why you cannot come to a live audition, that have nothing to do with how much you like the school, if you think the school is a good fit, or what kind of impression that you want to make. You might not be able to afford going to a live audition because it's just not something that your family can do. You might have a performance on that same day. You can't be in two places at once. So, some dates don't work out, like you have other things going on in your life, and you shouldn't have to be expected to just completely like drop everything or overextend yourself, however you define it, to be able to attend a live audition. So I think asking about kind of what happens in a live audition, and if I don't come to a live audition, is that going to negatively impact, kind of my ability to move through this process in a successful way.
And that I think that's the best perspective and approach to have at it is to ask because people are coming from all over the country and all over the world. It's much more difficult, and as you mentioned, it's also an access issue. Not everybody has the means and access to be able to do that. So what about from a portfolio? We read from the visual arts, they often have to submit a portfolio. I think Slide Room is one of the ones that is used. Going back to the message that it's a process. So in a portfolio, do the students want to show things like at the beginning stage, the middle stage, the end stage, or just all end? What is the purpose of a portfolio review, and how can the students know what's expected of them there?
So in terms of like a portfolio review, so this would be something that would be happening before you actually apply to the school. So if a lot of schools, not all, but some, especially the private art schools, will offer portfolio reviews. So you can contact them anytime and request a portfolio review. So, and you can meet with an admission counselor and they can walk you through it and kind of talk through. So National Portfolio Day is, I know they're not a college fair, but it looks an awful lot like one, but it's adjusted, it's unique to the visual arts because you have schools who are coming and they will do portfolio reviews. So and a lot of these schools also will do portfolio reviews like over Zoom or remotely. So that can kind of be a balance if if you want to kind of cut down the list of schools that you want to meet at National Portfolio Day, look up the ones who do reviews kind of whenever at your convenience, and then do them there. And then if you're at National Portfolio Day, like pick the schools where you have, it's harder to get access to them, but you're going to show up there. There's also as long as you bring up Slide Room, there is There's something called ACAD Slide Room. So it's the Association of Independent Colleges of Art and Design. So it's not an accrediting body, it's an organization of visual art schools. And they have a portal in Slide Room. So it's aicad.slideroom.com. And it's a place where you can connect to multiple ACAD schools and get portfolio reviews kind of in your sophomore year or your junior year. So you can get feedback and connect to those schools earlier. And that's all free. And that's a great resource. If you have never gotten a portfolio review before, or if you kind of want to see what a portfolio review looks like, there is a fantastic website called The Art Prof. So if you just Google the art, so ART space PROF, so like the art professor. And they have videos of sample portfolio reviews where they take someone's portfolio, and it can be specific to like graphic design or animation or to film or visual arts, painting, photography. And they do they'll take you through like a portfolio critique and it's really good to see, because I think a lot of students, you're used to like making one piece of work and then talking about it, and then making one piece of work and then talking about it. Where with the portfolio review, what's useful to see is that they not only speak about the individual pieces, but also how they function as a whole. So like, how do you, if you've got like 5 different pieces, what is the optimal way you can put them in a certain kind of order to tell a visual story? As long as we're coming back to storytelling. And it just helps to see, because I think there's a perception that portfolio reviews are mean. Like they're gonna, you didn't do this and
tear you down, and
like they're gonna be critical, which is different than getting a critique. And so seeing a video of what it looks like, which is way more generous. They want to leave you with something they want you to know, like, oh, this is what I see. This is what could work really well for us. Sometimes they'll tell you, like, you should really put this one in your portfolio. This is clearly a very strong piece, and they'll tell you why. Like, this technique over here is really like it tells us something that we really want to know about you. Here's a place where you could work a little bit more, kind of build this out a little bit more. And so they'll give you some advice and then some guidance so you can like move forward.
I think I will definitely include that in the notes so that we have that as a reference. And that's the kind of thing, knowing those resources are out there that we can send students to is really key. So Laura, as we wrap up our conversation, what would your last words of advice, what would you share with parents and students? What would be your...
I think that, if for thank you for being supportive, I think it's sometimes really scary for people to think about, oh my God, like I'm, sending my kid into the lion's den when it comes to a creative career. And I think that there's a lot that people, it's hard to know what it's like unless you're in it, because it is a really unique career path. There are a lot of shifts, there are a lot of turns. And I also think that creative people are very, very well equipped to drive on the windy mountain road, so to speak. I was on LinkedIn the other day and came across the profile of a student who came through our ethnomusicology major over 15 years ago. And like, he has gone on to, like, he went to a master's in library science and then got all of these accounting accreditations, and now works like in his local government as an accountant and an archivist, and is still playing music. And to me, kind of his pattern is so consistent with the working artists that I've known, that they start off doing a thing and then they just keep educating themselves and keep kind of searching for how to be better and kind of seeing where they're needed and getting educated and doing things really, really well, like to the best of their ability. And a lot of artists that you meet are very multi-hyphenated and they're good at a lot of stuff. And when we're talking about storytelling, we're thinking about people who are very quick thinkers, who are very good at improvisation. If you're an actor, you're great at improv, and you also have to be great at improv if you're a painter and your brush accidentally like drips in the middle of your painting, and then you got to kind of work it in. So you're adaptive. I think that artists are very good at mastering anxiety. I know that we kind of have a reputation for being a little bit twitchy, maybe more so than the average bear, but we're also taught to master it because that's the only way that we can access our creativity fully is if we really root down in our bodies and think about what's going on and like what is going on emotionally, not only with us, but the people around us, so that we can remain calm and present and so that we can be creative.
Mhm. Yeah, so
Um,
that you can reach in
yeah,
and use that in a creative way
yeah,
too.
like
Yeah,
being fantastic with like expressing emotions, emotional intelligence, because you have to be emotionally intelligent in order to communicate. And communication skills, like nuanced communication skills, like really, really, really like drill down, like get the name of the dog, emotional intelligence skills are something that is incredibly valuable. How to be in community, how to work in a group, how do you walk into a room full of people and connect with them meaningfully and quickly? How do you work towards a common goal? How do you know when you're supposed to be kind of take on more of a leadership role, or how do you become more of a team player? You have to, the curiosity component is huge. Like, how do you see
Mhm.
the world in a new way? Like the tremendous optimism that it takes to be a creative person. You know, we're, we're a very, very empathetic, very sensitive people, and they need a lot of support. So I appreciate you asking me these questions, and I know a lot of people are going to be listening to this as well. So thanks for advocating for the creative kids.
Oh, well, it it they bring in such a heart. And so being able to emphasize that and nurture that and help them flourish, that's what we're all here to do. So
Yeah.
thank you for what you do on your part to do that, and we'll try to continue to try to do that on our side too. So thank you, Laura, for your time and for your thoughts, and I appreciate all that you do.
Thank you so much.